In the early 1970s, there was an engine so powerful, so brutally overbuilt, that it could embarrass Corvettes, out-torque Cadillacs, and leave Mustangs choking on their own exhaust. It came from a brand nobody expected. Not Chevrolet with its legendary small blocks, not Pontiac with its screaming 400s, not even Chrysler with its infamous Hemis. It came from Buick, the brand your grandfather drove to church on Sundays. But here's the part no one talks about. This engine didn't die because it was weak. It didn't fade away because it couldn't compete. It died because it was too dangerous to exist, too powerful for the streets, too dominant for the tracks, and too inconvenient for a world that was rapidly changing around it. This is the story of the engine that was supposed to save Buick's performance image, cement its place among the muscle car elite, and instead became one of the most quietly erased legends in American automotive history. The Buick Stage 2 455. At first glance, the 455 looked like any other big block V8 of its time. Massive displacement, heavy iron construction, old-school pushrod architecture, nothing revolutionary on paper, but underneath that familiar exterior, this engine was hiding something deeply misunderstood, something that separated it from every competitor in Detroit. You see, while other brands were chasing horsepower numbers for magazine covers and marketing brochures, Buick engineers were chasing something far more useful, far more brutal, far more terrifying: torque. And not just ordinary torque, low RPM torque, the kind that hits you the moment your foot touches the throttle, the kind that doesn't wait for the tachometer to climb, the kind that makes the entire car feel like it's being shoved forward by an invisible hand. The standard Buick 455, released in 1970, already produced 510 lb-ft of torque from the factory. That wasn't a typo. 510 pound-feet at just 2,800 RPM. Let that sink in for a moment. Most engines of that era needed to wind up to 4,000 or 5,000 RPM to produce peak torque. They needed time, they needed momentum, they needed the driver to work with them. The Buick 455 didn't ask for any of that. It delivered maximum pulling power almost immediately off idle, before you were ready, before the chassis was ready, before the tires could even think about gripping. And when that torque hit the rear wheels of cars like the Buick GSX or the Grand Sport, something strange happened, something unsettling. The front end would lift, not metaphorically, physically. Drivers reported the nose rising under full throttle, like the car was trying to perform a wheelie it was never designed to execute. Quarter-mile launches felt violent and unpredictable. Steering would go light because there wasn't enough weight on the front tires to maintain proper contact. Traction became more of a suggestion than a guarantee. This wasn't the refined acceleration of a luxury car. This wasn't the progressive power delivery of a sports car. This was something rawer, something angrier. And Buick owners who experienced it for the first time never forgot. But that was just the production engine. The one Buick sold to regular customers. The one limited by emissions equipment, cast internals, and corporate restrictions. Because deep inside Buick's engineering division, behind closed doors, a secret project was underway. A project that would push the 455 architecture to its absolute breaking point. They called it Stage 2, and it was never meant for normal drivers. The Stage 2 program existed in a gray area between factory support and full racing development. It wasn't a production option you could check on an order form. It wasn't advertised in glossy brochures. It wasn't mentioned in press releases. But it was real. And it was terrifying. Unlike production engines designed for comfort, emissions compliance, and 100,000-mile longevity, the Stage 2 455 was built for one thing only: winning. The modifications started with the foundation. The engine block received reinforced main bearing webs to handle higher cylinder pressures and more aggressive power delivery. The bottom end was strengthened throughout, because standard castings simply couldn't survive what this engine was about to produce. The cylinder heads were completely redesigned. Larger race specification ports allowed dramatically improved airflow. The combustion chambers were optimized for maximum efficiency. Bigger valves, both intake and exhaust, increased the engine's ability to breathe at high RPM. The intake manifold featured massive high-flow runners that looked almost cartoonishly oversized compared to production pieces. Internally, nothing was left to chance. Hardened crankshafts replaced the standard units. Forged connecting rods eliminated the weak link that destroyed so many other high-performance engines. Forged pistons could withstand the punishment of compression ratios that soared past 11.01, sometimes reaching 12.01 or higher depending on the specific build. High-performance camshafts with aggressive lift and duration profiles ensured the valve train could keep up with the engine's newfound appetite for air and fuel. In full race trim, this engine could produce over 600 horsepower, numbers that wouldn't become common in production cars for another 4 decades. But here's the thing, horsepower wasn't even the real story. The real story was torque. With race-prepped torque figures pushing beyond 600 lb-ft and some builds reportedly exceeding 650 lb-ft. The Stage 2 455 wasn't just quick, it wasn't just fast, it was violent. This wasn't acceleration in the traditional sense, it was assault. Mechanical brutality delivered through the rear axle with zero warning and zero apology. On drag strips across America, specially prepared Stage 2 powered Buicks began appearing in NHRA stock and super stock classes. And they didn't just compete, they dominated. These weren't nimble, lightweight cars. Buicks were heavy, full-sized, designed for comfort first and speed second. But with the Stage 2 455 under the hood, none of that mattered. They launched harder than anything else in their class. They pulled longer through the quarter mile, they trapped higher speeds at the finish line, and they punished transmissions, rear axles, and drivetrains that were never built to handle their monstrous low-end torque curves. The competition didn't know what to do. How do you beat an engine that produces peak torque before you've even finished releasing the clutch? How do you outlaunch a car that's already accelerating while yours is still building power? Racers who piloted these Stage 2 Buicks described the experience in almost reverent terms. It wasn't like driving a car. It was like holding on to something alive, something powerful, something barely contained. The engine didn't wind up gradually. It hit hard. Every launch felt like a controlled explosion. Every pass felt like you were pushing the boundaries of what the chassis could physically handle. And for a brief moment, Buick, the brand known for quiet luxury and comfortable cruising, had built something genuinely feared on the drag strip. But success came with a problem. Actually, several problems. The first threat came from Washington. The newly formed Environmental Protection Agency had begun enforcing strict limits on hydrocarbon and nitrogen oxide emissions. The early 1970s marked a dramatic shift in American automotive policy. Clean air wasn't optional anymore. It was federal law. And high-compression, big blocks, the very engines that defined the muscle car era, were suddenly public enemy number one. The Stage 2 455 didn't just fail emissions tests. It obliterated them. It laughed at them. It produced emissions figures that made regulators physically uncomfortable. Even detuned versions of the engine struggled to meet federal requirements without sacrificing the very performance characteristics that made them legendary in the first place. You couldn't have both. Either you had the torque monster, or you had compliance. But emissions weren't the only threat gathering on the horizon. Insurance companies had started noticing something disturbing. Cars equipped with high-performance engines were getting into more accidents. And not just minor fender benders, major incidents. High-speed, loss-of-control crashes. Single vehicle accidents where muscle cars left the road entirely. Drivers who couldn't handle the power they'd purchased. Insurance actuaries ran the numbers, and the numbers were frightening. Premiums skyrocketed for muscle cars with large displacement engines, especially ones producing more than 1 horsepower per cubic inch, a threshold that became an informal line in the sand. The Buick 455 was already doing that in stock form. The Stage 2? It wasn't even playing the same game anymore. It was producing power figures that insurance companies couldn't even properly calculate because they fell outside normal risk models. Suddenly, dealerships found it harder to sell high-performance variants. Young buyers, the primary muscle car demographic, didn't want to pay insurance premiums that rivaled mortgage payments. They couldn't afford to. The performance didn't matter if you couldn't insure it. And internally, within General Motors itself, something else was happening. Something quieter, something more insidious. GM executives had issued a mandate, an unofficial policy that would never appear in any public document, but was understood by everyone who worked in the performance divisions. No intermediate car could officially produce more than 400 cubic inches of displacement. It was a preemptive move, a way to shield the corporation from regulatory scrutiny, from insurance liability, from public criticism about selling dangerous vehicles to young drivers. It didn't matter how advanced your engineering was. It didn't matter how promising your performance data looked. It didn't matter how dominant your results were on the drag strip. If your engine broke the 400 cubic inch rule, it wasn't getting corporate approval for mainstream production. The 455 blew past that limit by 55 cubic inches, 13% over the line, impossible to hide, and just like that, Buick's ultimate weapon became politically inconvenient, a corporate embarrassment, a liability waiting to happen. Officially, the Stage 2 was never offered in mass production street cars. It remained a dealer-installed option, a racing package, a ghost in the system, something you could technically get if you knew the right people, if you found the right dealership, if you asked the right questions. But even then, it came with risks. Too much torque meant overstressed drivetrains. Rear axles designed for 350 lb-ft would snap under 600. Transmissions rated for gentle luxury car duty would overheat and fail under racing loads. Drive shafts literally twisted under launch forces they were never engineered to endure. Universal joints exploded. Differentials grenaded. This engine wasn't just pushing the limits of performance, it was exposing the limits of everything around it. Eventually, the entire muscle car era began collapsing under its own weight. Rising fuel prices from the 1973 oil crisis made large displacement engines suddenly impractical. Government regulation continued tightening with no end in sight. Corporate risk aversion made executives allergic to anything that could generate negative headlines. And changing public tastes moved away from raw performance toward efficiency and practicality. By the mid-1970s, the Stage 2 program had effectively disappeared from public view. No farewell announcement, no final press release, no commemorative edition, just silence. The engineers who built it moved on to other projects. The racing teams that campaigned it retired their cars. The dealerships that installed it stopped offering the option. Buick shifted focus toward efficiency, comfort, luxury. The brand returned to what people expected from it. Performance became a liability instead of an identity, and one of the most torque-dominant engines ever developed by an American manufacturer faded into obscurity, forgotten by the mainstream, erased from the official narrative. But here's the twist that nobody expected. Decades later, long after the muscle car era had been declared dead and buried, enthusiasts would rediscover what Buick had quietly created. In garages across America, hobbyists and historians began piecing together the Stage 2 story from old parts books, racing records, and the memories of engineers who were finally willing to talk. Modern dyno builds of properly assembled Stage 2 455 engines have produced over 700 horsepower, naturally aspirated, without forced induction, without turbochargers or superchargers, without nitrous oxide, without any artificial enhancement, just displacement, airflow, and raw mechanical intent. 700 horsepower from technology designed in the 1960s, built with iron blocks and pushrod valve trains, using principles that modern engineers often dismiss as obsolete. In an era where performance is measured by turbochargers, hybrid assist systems, and software calibration maps, the Stage 2 455 stands as a monument to a different philosophy entirely. There are no drive modes to select, no traction management systems to negotiate with, no torque vectoring algorithms making decisions for you, no electronic nannies waiting to intervene. Just metal, fuel, air, and controlled explosions happening thousands of times per minute. The relationship between driver and machine was absolute. Either you could handle it, or you couldn't. There was no in-between. The Buick Stage 2 455 wasn't killed because it failed. It wasn't abandoned because the engineering was flawed. It wasn't forgotten because competitors built something better. It was killed because it succeeded too well. Too powerful for a world that was no longer ready for what it represented. Too dominant for an industry being forced to change direction. Too honest for an era that was learning to prefer compromise. The tragedy of the Stage 2 isn't that it couldn't perform. It's that it performed exactly as intended, in a world that had decided such performance was no longer acceptable. And maybe that's the saddest fate an engine can suffer. Not failure, not obsolescence, but success that arrives at the wrong moment in history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of muscle history's most quietly terrifying engines, make sure to subscribe to Engine Fallout for more stories about the machines that pushed boundaries and paid the price for it. Because sometimes, the most dangerous engines aren't the ones that break. They're the ones that work exactly as intended, and the world isn't always ready for that.